Hey everyone! Well, after having a wonderful New Year's in San Miguel de Allende, we headed west to the colorful town of Guanajuato.
Guanajuato is another old Mexican city with narrow cobblestone roads meandering through the hillside and wandering through tunnels that are buried under the town. So I found a place called Casa Estrella, which is a hotel with an RV parking area that's a couple kilometers to the north of the city that would avoid us driving in the city completely.
When we arrived at Casa Estrella, we met our contact. He hopped on the front of Rocky and he guided Kendrick through the narrow streets to the spot that we were going to park.
When we met the owner, Javier, he was one of the kindest people you can imagine. And you could tell that he really took a lot of pride in the hotel Casa Estrella because it was one of the most beautiful hotels I've ever seen. Not to mention, we got an entire clean bathroom and hot shower all to ourselves, which was our first in Mexico so far.
It was about time, I think. You stink. We stink. Now, the RV park was actually just the parking lot at the hotel, but it had water and electric hookups. And honestly, when you have a view overlooking the colorful city of Guanajuato, you don't really complain that you're parked in a parking lot.
Once we got settled in, we decided to assume our roles as tourists. So, we headed down into town.
Walking through town was so much fun. There were all kinds of street vendors selling everything from fruits and vegetables to parrots. Speaking of, why didn't we get a parrot?
Pretty sure I could teach it to sit on my shoulder.
As we got into the center of town, Kendrick's stomach told us it was time to eat. So we found a perfect little restaurant that had an outdoor seating area that allowed us to watch people walking by and have a great view of a nearby cathedral.
But most important, great food.
Great food. Now, one of my biggest fears before we came down to Mexico was that I wasn't going to be able to find a salad. But this restaurant had probably one of the best salads I've ever eaten in my life.
One of my biggest fears coming into Mexico was that I wasn't going to be able to find tacos or enchiladas or cheap beer, but luckily it's been plentiful.
Now, one of the best ways to stave off a Mexican food coma is to get out and walk around. Luckily, there was all kinds of things to photograph in Guanajuato. I particularly have been really inspired by the cathedrals. I've enjoyed shooting not only the ceilings, but the floors also.
Now, I have a natural tendency to want to walk uphill. So when I saw the Monumento al Pipila Guanajuato on the map, I knew there had to be a good overlook up there.
As we were finding our way up to this monument, we discovered one of the most unique features about Guanajuato. The heart of town is full of what you might call alleyways, not meant for cars, but for walking through. There's all kinds of passages and walkways, nooks and crannies, you might say. And the best part about it is that they were painted all different colors and full of beautiful graffiti. When we reached the top, we realized it was well worth the effort. There were a lot of tourists up there doing the same thing as us, but we could see why. The view was absolutely spectacular. Overlooking all of the uniquely colorful buildings and the cathedral below was just indescribable.
Now, all of this walking around being a tourist got me really thirsty. One thing that's been really hard to come by in Mexico is good beer. So I was really happy whenever I saw a place called The Beer Company, which has quite the selection of Mexico craft brews as well as craft beers from around the world. It's kind of surprising how many craft beers actually exist in Mexico. It's just that you can't find them anywhere. But luckily, The Beer Company has managed to put together a really good selection of Mexico craft beers.
And I was happy to tag along because the view from the rooftop patio was not too shabby. The sun had set, so we decided to head home, but of course, Kendrick can't pass up a good street food opportunity, so we ended up stopping for both pizza and some roasted corn on the way home.
Bye. It's a cup of corn. I don't know what you call it. More than a cup of corn.
Now, we had walked several miles from the hotel to get into town, and it was time to go home at night. What do we do in the States at night when we need to get home?
Uber.
So I opened my Uber app, and to my delight, I was able to book us an Uber in Spanish through the app, and I was pretty proud of myself.
Perhaps the biggest surprise was, even with gas prices being nearly $4 a gallon, and taking an Uber at the busiest time of week, our Uber ride was only $2.50.
After exploring Guanajuato, it was time to figure out what our next stop was going to be. Now, Kendrick had been mentioning to me something about a gasoline shortage.
When we're traveling, I like to keep up with current events happening around us. It could be something like a wildfire happening up in Canada, or in this case, a gasoline shortage in central Mexico. I can tell that the gas situation in central Mexico was bad and was only getting worse, and that getting enough gas to get to our next destination was going to be a bit of a challenge. So I set off on what ended up being a 3-hour ordeal to try to find gas. So there is a gas scarcity here in central Mexico right now, not due to shortage of production, but shortage of supply. Something to do with shutting down the pipeline that's been used for some mafia people to siphon off gas for years and years and years. Massive lines converging from everywhere, people getting out of their cars and walking up to the front of the line with gas cans. People cutting in line and almost getting beat up by the people they cut in front of, so we'll see what happens. And when I finally did find gas, they rationed us to 500 pesos, which is less than half a tank of gas, which we hoped would be enough to get us to our next destination.
One thing we've learned is that while you're traveling, it's really useful to stay on top of current events and also join some social media groups such as On the Road in Mexico, which has helped inform us of current events that might affect our travel plans. While it's great to disconnect every now and then, next time you're on vacation, make sure not to block out the world around you. So, here's to keeping that gas tank full. Love and light. Ugh.